Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus. This is episode 93 and I am the show's host, Kyle. For those of you who have been listening to this show and sharing the show, it's been awesome. I have a ton of new viewers, so I'm just going to, do a little introduction on today's show to say hey to all the new viewers. The show comes out 3 days a week, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I try to get the shows out in the morning, but it doesn't always happen. Like this will be an afternoon release show, so sometimes you probably won't get the show till the next morning, but I hope everybody's enjoying it. If you have any feedback on the show or just want to, send me a message or whatever, you contact me at the Facebook page Kyle's Files or through email, kylesfilesblog@gmail.com. Kyle's Files blog is, of course, the name of my website that I use to kind of do the news roundups every day. The news roundups are really kind of like a show notes page for the show. A lot of the stories that I talk about in the show are in the show note or in the roundups I put out every morning, Monday through Friday. The roundups can be found at thelibertarianinstitute.org or on Kyle's Files, either Facebook, however you want to find it. Those are the two places I publish it every morning. And then, 3 days a week, I pick up the microphone, come on a show, and talk about all the current events issues. For those of you who prefer to look into and read, I try to get in-depth in a lot of the stories, just kind of give the whole picture and not just, the narrow window that a politician or the mainstream media likes to talk about. Occasionally, I'll bring on a guest. I'm looking for having a really cool guest on show 100, so once I get all that locked down, I will definitely make an announcement that I think everybody will be excited to hear. For those of you listening to the podcast and want to share it to help this growing audience continue to grow larger, then go to foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com or go to Kyle's Files on Facebook. Either place is a very easy place to find and share the show. Twitter, Facebook, whatever you got, get it out there. I'd really appreciate it. So now I've rambled enough about that. Let's get into the news for today. The first thing we have up is the Trump renews the 9/11 state of emergency that was passed just after granted to the president just after 9/11. As with most situations, to have the whole congressional body get together and then respond to what happened to 9/11, even if we're going by the Constitution, then you could see that there would be some gap between 9/11 and then the president being able to take response. So I think there was this initial state of emergency declared and then the president given powers that have not yet been declassified. And the president had, I guess those powers being for some kind of defense of the United States, or maybe if Osama bin Laden was an easy target, taking him out. Either way, we have these 9/11 state of emergency powers still granted to the president. The president keeps renewing them, and it's just amazing that they have, now cleaned up the debris of 9/11 and built a memorial in a new tower, bigger, taller tower in its place, and we're still pretending like, it's September 12th, 2001. It's absolutely not. And, getting rid of this state of emergency would, I think, just be a big symbolic move for Americans. Trump could say, guys, it's time to move on. I understand that on 9/12/2001, we were scared and we're worried that another attack was going to happen again, and we really want to catch the guy responsible, so we gave the president these emergency powers. But 16 years later, bin Laden is dead and there's more terrorists because of our military actions, so it's time to come home. But we don't have that symbolic move where you're saying, hey, look, this state of emergency is done. Also, let us know what you're getting out of that state of emergency, Donald Trump. What kind of additional powers come there? The more interesting story, and I think one of the most interesting stories I have for everyone today, and that is Russia apparently offered the United States and, specifically the Trump administration a reset in March. Now, famously, at the beginning of the Obama administration, there was supposed to be a reset with Russia. Relations between the Bush administration and Russia had kind of been moving in the wrong direction, although not that bad, but NATO expansion had made the Russians upset, plus U.S. interventionism with jihadists associated with the southern area of Russia and the states that border Russia on its southern border. And then if you remember all the way back to the end of the Bush administration, there was talk of Iranian or Russian support for Iran and all these kind of ties and stuff like that. And so the relations between Russia and the United States weren't good at the time. Of course, Hillary Clinton absolutely botched the Russian reset, and then we ended up, with a horrible Russia policy under Obama that kind of festered along through the end of his first administration. And then by the time 2016 rolls around, Obama Putin are, going back and forth with sanctions. Obama's kicking Russians out of the United States right around Christmas. The United States continues to expand and advance its anti-ballistic missile defense systems, which of course Russia sees as a violation of a treaty signed by the United States and the USSR. And then, Trump takes office and Russia then extends the hand. I'm not sure who did during the Obama reset and said, hey, look, things are going in the wrong direction, but there's some mutual ground here. Let's see if we can build on that. Apparently, this seems to be pretty much rejected by the Trump administration. At least he didn't take them off on the offers. If you go back to Downward Spiral, a podcast I did 5, 6, 7 episodes ago now, I kind of go through the history of U.S.-Russian relations since Trump took office and look at kind of the downward spiral things have been in. Although we did get some, I would say, good news, probably the best news I brought you on this show so far in September. And that is both the State Department and Russia's foreign ministry put out statements basically saying there's no need for further retaliation, and hopefully they're looking to stop this downward spiral. This is great news, although, a little worrying if relations between the U.S. and Russia are so bad that these State Department diplomats could actually see that there's a real problem here, then there's a real problem here. And hopefully that doesn't mean that things are so bad that we can't get them back. But, this is a good sign. But also, I guess, let's not forget that whenever things are so bad the State Department's worried, then, maybe the rest of us should be a little bit worried too. Hopefully this plays out and, maybe this could be the building blocks of a reset between relations. Both countries realize, hey, this has long been a cycle of the United States does something, so Russia puts sanctions, so the U.S. puts on sanctions. So Russia kicks people out, so the United States kicks people out and puts on sanctions, and so, this happens and that happens, and back and forth and around we go, and we go worse and worse places. Now it looks like they're saying, hey, let's stop this, let's knock it off, and so maybe then we'll start to see some steps back, some reduction of sanctions on different assets, and a return maybe of the Russian and American consulates that the opposing government has taken from the other in the kicking out of diplomats and all this kind of stuff. So, let's have some hope here. Let's, hopefully this is a sign of good things to come. Of course, it's only a minor footnote, according to the mainstream media. This is a story. Even the Russian offering the reset with Trump, it hasn't been all that big of a story. And whenever I do see it as a story, it's kind of spun as like the nefarious Vladimir Putin first wins the election for Donald Trump and then offers him an olive branch, which is just insane that you're somehow smearing an opposing nuclear power for offering some kind of olive branch and to say, hey, this isn't that big of a deal. Of course, the United States and Russia have plenty of common interests, and there's absolutely no reason the two countries couldn't find ways to get along. In Syria, they're basically wanting the same goal, which is the elimination of the jihadists. Thanks to the very poor quality of the American media, many Americans don't know that, Russia has a problem with jihadists too. There's a lot of Muslims that live in southern Russia and have for a very long time. It's not that they're, immigrants and migrants like the West is seeing. In fact, one of the most famous of the ISIS fighters was Omar the Chechenian, who was, trained in an area near Russia by the United States. And so Russia has its own problems with jihadists. A Russian airliner has been shut down. A Russian cop was killed a couple weeks ago by an ISIS fighter. And so the United States and Russia seemingly have very common goals in Syria, at least to what they tell their people, which is to wipe out the jihadists. And that's probably because most average Americans and most average Russians don't have a whole lot of care whether the Kurdish or that Assad controls the state of Syria. Either one would definitely combat the ISIS threat. And so really, I'm sure that if I went and asked all my next door neighbors, hey, which is better, which is what, they really don't know. They have no idea who the Kurds are, and they have no idea who the Syrian Arab army is, and, really who Assad is, as far as what it's like to live under his rule. But instead, the United States and Russia each pick different sides in this fight, and for, the larger geopolitical reasons that probably has to deal a lot with the deep states of both countries, we end up with in a situation where, while the common goal of the American and the Russian people is very obvious, and it would be completely possible for both the American and the Russian military to fight on the same goal on the same side for the common goals of their people, they end up on different sides of a war, and then the common enemy of the American and the Russian people, and really all three people around the world, thrives because of the leadership of each country's inability to get along. And for, the time I've been on this podcast, I've often put a lot of that blame on the United States. I think it's pretty obvious that this, Russia extending the olive branch, offering a reset, is kind of in the long line of is seeming to be the Americans wanting less to deal with Russia than the Russia wanting to deal with the United States in Syria. Of course, now we're in a very, very interesting situation in Syria, and this isn't to get too far off track from Russian relations because I have one more story to come back to, but there's a city in southeastern-ish, south-central-ish Syria called Deir al-Zor or Deir ez-Zor. It's the province of Deir ez-Zor is named after the city Deir ez-Zor. And so occasionally in the mainstream media, they talk about this issue in the wrong way because somebody either didn't translate right or they're unaware that the province and the city carry the same name. Either way, where the Syrian Arab Army has broken a 3-year siege of the city that ISIS had trapped in, some Syrian Arab Army soldiers and some civilians loyal to the Syrian government. They had the city surrounded. The siege has finally been broken, and now the Syrian Arab Army is clearing the ISIS fighters out of the surrounding kind of outskirts of the city type areas, while Kurdish forces backed by the United States move down from the south of Raqqa and more towards the city. One of the key purposes of the city is that there's a lot of big, money oil fields around it. The Al Omar, I believe is the name of it, oil field that is just kind of, I believe, southeast of the city of Deir ez-Zor is the biggest oil field in Syria, and it was the oil field that I think ISIS was making the most money off of at one point. Now ISIS will lose those oil fields every day, and whoever gets those oil fields is going to, be able to export a hell of a lot of oil out of it, and it looks like there's a race towards this area. Moon of Alabama has discussed this a few times, and I think I've mentioned it on the show in the past because we've kind of seen this problem coming for months, is that the city of Deir ez-Zor will be a possible conflict point for the United States and its Kurdish allies, and then the Assad army, Iran, and Russia on the other side. Right now, in the outskirts of Deir ez-Zor, we have both the United States and Russia warplanes responsible for civilian deaths and targeting civilian infrastructure. Russia is launching cruise missiles from the Mediterranean Sea, as well as having airplanes drop airstrikes. And the United States is having, I'm sure, F-16s flying around the area, dropping strikes on ISIS fighters as well, and as well as Syrian civilians. I believe the U.S. actually hit a ISIS jail over in this area, of course, killing 18 inmates in the jail, although, as I've discussed several times, an inmate in ISIS jail probably isn't an actual criminal. And so for a long time, I had kind of the impression that maybe the Syrian Arab Army and the Russians would be able to take enough of this area around Deir ez-Zor, especially the oil fields, so before the United States and the Kurds got close enough to really contest them for it. Because it seems like the name of the game right now in Syria is that everybody's allowed to take territory from ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but if it's a U.S.-backed rebel group or U.S.-backed Kurds, then the Syrian government can take land from them. And so it's kind of a race to see who could get ISIS out of control of these oil fields. But now it looks like that the U.S. and the Kurds will at least have an opportunity to get close to fighting ISIS for the oil fields first, which, could just create a lot of problems because you're going to have U.S. and Russian planes in the air right in this area, and it's just going to be a whole giant mess. That being said, who knows what's going to happen. Maybe this is all going to work out fine, and maybe this is going to be a bunch of nothing, and the Syrian government will take these areas, and the U.S. government will take these areas, and they'll all work it out in this orderly fashion, and it'll be okay. But just a possible flashpoint between two world nuclear powers. The last thing I'll say on this issue of the Deir ez-Zor is just how ironic it is, I guess. Right now you have the United States on kind of the eastern side of the Euphrates River and Russia on the western side of the Euphrates River here. Russia is backing the Assad government, which certainly isn't a pro-freedom government or a pro-capitalism government, but they are much more capitalist than the Kurds, who are absolute Marxist. And so I guess it's just funny that this is like a complete reversal from the Cold War, and nobody's on TV screaming about this at all whatsoever. The other big news on U.S.-Russian relations is we have the Russian, I believe, Zapad war games going on, and it's probably pronounced differently in Russian, so I apologize for pronouncing it wrong. I'm just some guy from the United States. And there's about 1,300 or 13,000 Russian troops participating in these war games. For the longest time, NATO estimate that the numbers would be in the hundreds of thousands. Of course, this prediction did not come true. And we've had a lot of, HOTS, the Charles Krauthammers, the Bill O'Reillys, the Jay Tappers of the world, saying how big of a threat this is going to be and how we should all be concerned how Russia's going to put all these troops in Belarus and then they're going to steal part of Poland. They're just going to roll the tanks right in and they're going to steal Poland. Is this crazy narrative that the war hawks are putting out. Now, of course, they cite the coup in, or not the coup in Ukraine, they cite the Russian annexation of Crimea as, kind of their proof that this is going to happen. They're going to say, look, the nefarious Russians stole Crimea right out from everybody's nose in 2014. And, and that's the situation we're in. When really that, is absolutely not what happened. The United States orchestrated a coup in Ukraine first, then the Crimeans seceded from the rest of the Ukrainian state because they didn't like the government that the United States installed. And then the Crimeans asked to join Russia because, for the most part, Crimea is ethnic Russian. And so it would make sense that they want to be a part of Russia. So there's the real history of that. The U.S. has responded to the war games by moving 2 tank brigades into Poland, so I'm probably pretty close to matching forces right now in Belarus for the war games, and then on the other side of the border for the United States and the NATO forces. We've put awful lot of troops over there. They've been ticking up 800 at a time, and now there's 2 tank brigades out there. Of course, northern Poland borders Russia. This is never the way it's described in the mainstream media. They say, there's a threat to Poland, and that the United States is going to move 2 brigades of tanks to northern Poland to prevent this. But northern Poland is on the border of the Russian enclave right there. So, a matter of perspective, I guess. Some other big news in U.S. foreign policy, and that is the treatment of the Iranian nuclear deal. Trump said that Iran is violating the spirit of the deal. It was really disappointing to me when I saw Trump use that phrase, the spirit of the deal. This is the phrase that a lot of the war hawks and the neocons have been using over the past few months to say how Iran is violating the deal. Since the IAEA, the agency tasked with regulating the nuclear deal and the non-proliferation treaty, has said over and over, well, the Iranians are following the deal. The Iranians are following the deal, and so the government has now invented this idea that the Iranians are violating the spirit of the deal, because while they may not have nuclear weapons, they're developing ballistic missiles, and we know it doesn't say anything in the nuclear deal that they can't do that, but we don't think they should be, so, they should stop, or we're going to say they're violating the deal. One of the neocons who has pushed this line over and over is John Bolton. There was an excellent article in the American Conservative. It ran in the opinion section on the anti-war homepage. I believe it's still there if you check it out on 9/15 Friday. Just going into detail about how John Bolton has been wrong just about on everything ever. And Scott Horton and I believe it was Tim Sherrock, who discussed the similarities between how first Bolton tanked, or at least was encouraging Bush to taint the agreed framework that they had with North Korea. And now North Korea has a hydrogen bomb, and now he's encouraging Trump to taint the Iran nuclear deal. So what do you think is going to happen, Mr. John Bolton? Just on that note, there is a John Bolton that you can listen to, and that is John Q. Bolton, who's a former Army officer who wrote an excellent piece a while ago, and I'll be sure to link to it in the show notes for today. Just kind of about the futility of the war in Afghanistan. Other stories I want to touch on, and one story that I guess is some good news, but not necessarily, but just kind of an interesting article about how the country of Myanmar is kind of located right in between China and India. And so the author was arguing that hopefully this will keep the United States out of the country, that there's 2 nuclear powers that border it, and so that should keep the United States away. That's a good enough U.S. deterrent. Of course, those are the 2 nuclear powers that the United States, doesn't necessarily get along with 100%. While India and China are both enemies of each other, the United States is definitely an enemy of India, and at least now on friendly terms with China. So hopefully that'll keep another intervention from popping up. The North Koreans had another missile test, intermediate range ballistic missile that went over Japan again. It launched from the country's capital. Not sure why they're doing this. Seems like Kim Jong-un is doing an awful lot of instigating here. I'm not sure what kind of reaction he's hoping to get out of the United States. I don't think, and to reiterate this again, I do not think that Kim Jong-un is an irrational man. I think he at least believes that, launching these ballistic missiles are going to help North Korea in some way. I don't think he's trying to provoke a war. I'm not sure if he wants the U.S. to try to shoot down one of these missiles to see what will happen. That's kind of been my thinking, is I've kind of been waiting for the U.S. to try to shoot down one of these missiles to see what happens. I'm kind of glad they haven't, because then if they shoot one down, they could argue that the trajectory wasn't somewhere targeting the middle of the Pacific Ocean like all these missiles have ended up landing. So yeah, definitely something to keep an eye on. I'm expecting a lot of very hawkish statements coming out of the Trump administration today and over the weekend. I'll probably cover a lot of that on Monday. Another North Korea related story, and that is we have the president of North Korea saying that he doesn't want to allow U.S. nuclear weapons back into the country. The Washington Post reported on a separate issue, and that is a delegation of South Korean opposition party members, so of a political party, not of the president. And while they openly conceded that the current president of South Korea won on a ballot of getting along better with North Korea and being opposed to the missile defense systems that the United States has installed in South Korea, that they want the United States to push South Korea to take U.S. nuclear weapons. They kind of say, yeah, the president has said no, but if you push really hard, they're not going to. So this was an interesting story. I hated the headline for this story. The Washington Post, so dishonest. It doesn't mention that the delegation from South Korea was of the opposite party, something that I would see would be a key detail, and they just say the South Koreans are asking the United States for nuclear weapons. That's not what happened at all. Or a South Korean delegation is asking the United States for nuclear weapons, and that's not what's happening. It's a delegation of opposition party members. They do not represent the South Korean president and the South Korean government that would be able to make a decision on this issue. So very misleading, very dishonest. Last story related to North Korea, and that is we have Russia and China warning the U.S. not to follow through with regime change on North Korea. Some stories out of Africa. First, I saw a very disturbing video of a South African riot police officer shooting a 14-year-old boy in the face at point-blank range with rubber bullets. I guess the kid has some oral surgery because of it. Police abuse is a problem all over the world, apparently. We have a release of some new Snowden documents that show the CIA or the NSA's spying program that was built in Ethiopia to spy on people in the Horn of Africa. It's published at the Intercept, linked in the show notes page. That way you can check that out. Some news on Afghanistan. The first thing is we have Pakistan kind of calling the U.S. bluff, saying that if the United States wants to cut off aid, they can, that Pakistan fights terrorism more than anybody else. In a very real way, the United States has made the terrorist problem a lot worse for Pakistan because they've driven all the Taliban and a lot of the Al-Qaeda out of Afghanistan and then into Pakistan. So I think Pakistan made a pretty decent case for themselves. From Australia, we have the Australian Federal Police saying that an Australian Special Forces member who desecrated bodies by cutting the hands off of 2 Taliban fighters will not be charged with war crimes. We have an ISIS terrorist attack on a Shiite restaurant in Iraq, killing at least 89 people. The Kurdish independence vote will be in 10 days, and so let's everybody just keep their eyes open for that one. And we have the United States releasing a map of 81 unexploded U.S. ordinances in Mosul. Apparently the United States, drops a bunch of airstrikes on Mosul, and some of those bombs don't explode. This creates a real problem because these bombs can go off, and, if you're bulldozing a house because it's been destroyed and you bulldoze over one of the bombs, you really, have a chance of setting one of those off. This is a problem around the world. The cluster munitions, I think, are the worst for doing this. in Cambodia today, you still have people who will, maybe be plowing a field with a tractor and then set off one of the little balls from the cluster bombs and kill him, or some kid in Yemen will pick up a shiny round ball and it'll be a bomb and it'll blow off his arm and half his face, and it's a terrible catastrophe. So at least the United States has released this map, but this is just another consequence of war, that common theme on the show of what are some of the consequences of war that nobody ever likes to talk about. And one of those is if you drop thousands of bombs on a city, some of those bombs aren't going to go off, and then someday in the future, some people are going to die because one of those bombs exploded. I mean, they're still having to evacuate European cities to clear bombs from World War II. One of the most interesting stories that I've read so far is that a U.S. citizen has surrendered to Kurdish forces in Syria. Definitely will have more on this to come. I think this is one of the places where we could have a real blow to the United States Bill of Rights. Hopefully Trump handles this situation the right way. No doubt if an American has joined ISIS that he has committed some kind of criminal act, I am sure, and should be tried and punished, but hopefully we don't have some sort of tribunal or extrajudicial justice situation taking place here, because that could really erode the rights of all Americans. I've also read reports of the Islamic State fleeing Syria through a border in Turkey. Of course, a very common theme of the ISIS war has just been what's going to happen with all these foreign fighters. It looks like now a lot of them are running away. In Yemen, we have kind of a major development, and that is China has now backed a plan to do an independent human rights war violations type investigation into Yemen. Of course, Saudi Arabia has been one party in an absolute brutal civil war. The Saudi-led coalition has bombed funerals, hospitals, schools, water treatment facilities, factories, you name it. They've destroyed it. Ports, they're blockading the country. They're committing multiple atrocities against the Yemeni people. And this is all backed by the United States. So Saudi Arabia and the United States has taken a very firm stance against this action, but hopefully it will happen. It's important for justice to be carried out, even if it's against your own country. And, while I don't want the United States to commit war crimes, and I don't want the UN to be investigating the United States and finding them guilty of war crimes, that the United States is committing war crimes and needs to be pointed out and stopped immediately. So hopefully that could happen. Alright, that'll wrap up my show for today. I hope everybody enjoyed the show. The website for the show is foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, and my personal website is kylesfilesblog.com. The Facebook page is Kyle's Files. Files is spelled F-Y-L-E-S, kind of like Kyle's. You can find all my work on the libertarianinstitute.org. The Twitter handle is KYAAALE. And if anybody's interested, there's a private Facebook group, Foreign Policy Focus. Thanks, y'all.